Today on Mighty Six Conversations, property tax season is at the door, and we've got your answers to all your questions about property tax appraisals. We'll also focus on the topic that's on the minds of many Fulton County residents, and that is homestead exemptions. We'll explain what they are and how they can ease the burden of your property taxes. Mighty Six Conversations is next. We started these Mighty Conversations 2 decades ago, and there's no time like the present to talk about the things that are important. I'm Commissioner Khadijah, and this is the Mighty Six Conversations. Welcome to another edition of Mighty Six Conversations. I'm Vice Chair Khadijah Abdul Rahman, affectionately known as Vice Chair Khadijah. Today, we tackle 2 subjects that go hand in hand: homestead exemptions and property taxes. Coming up, we'll have a conversation on homestead exemptions that you don't want to miss. But first, are you a homeowner wondering why your tax bill seems to be increasing? Well, I'm one of those individuals. Joining me today is Mr. Roderick Conley, a chief appraiser for Fulton County, who will help us unravel the challenges surrounding property taxes and shed light on what we all need to know as Fulton County taxpayers. Mr. Conley, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you, Vice Chair Khadijah, for the invitation.
Listen, I want you to start with explaining the role of Board of Assessors. When you explain it, though, explain it to me like I'm kind of like a little kid almost. Just break it down and explain it for our viewers.
Absolutely. So the Board of Assessors is a 5-member board. They're appointed by the Board of Commissioners, and they're responsible for establishing the fair market value of all taxable properties within Fulton County. That's real property and also personal property. Now, we have about over 365,000 real property in Fulton County and 28,000 personal property accounts. The department is broken down into 4 divisions: support service, which has the GIS, field book, and homestead, but you also have residential, commercial, and then personal property.
Now, these individuals that are on the board, do they have some kind of special quality? Are they just members of the community? Can you kind of educate us on that part?
They are members of the community, and it is up to the Board of Commissioners to appoint those folks, and they are on a staggered 4-year term.
Okay. What are tax appraisals based on, and what contributes to the fluctuations that occur at times?
So tax appraisals are based on the characteristics of your property. So if you're thinking about the age of an improvement, the size, meaning the square footage, the quality of construction of that, and then location, 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 and then the market. And so the fluctuation may be explained by, again, the market, the cost of construction. What it takes to build a house today is not the same what it took last year or even the year before. Then when we talk about the market, you also have to take into account what comparable properties have sold for in your general area.
You know, I'm so glad you explained that, because I have so many calls that come into the office, and we try to intercept, so to speak, and educate. We have people that are in traditional neighborhoods that may have been in their home for a while, but they have not only home sales, they have development, they have changes. I think if you can explain to the homeowners how they can benefit from understanding the assessment of their property, and kind of describe in layman's term what are the steps involved in creating a property assessment.
Well, it's vitally important for a taxpayer to understand the assessment. It will ensure that they're paying their fair share of taxes. No one wants to pay more, and everyone, so in order for it to come up with the fair market value, appraisal staff, they go out and they verify the characteristics of the properties, those things that we previously mentioned. Once they verify those characteristics, they go about the process of reviewing and analyzing the market data. Again, those sales that sold of comparable homes. Once they finish that process, when there is a variation or a difference in value from the assessed value and then what is the suggestion of the sales price, they make an adjustment to bring the value to market.
Now, I'm glad you said that. I think of a particular case where a constituent was trying to sell their property and they felt like the assessment should have been a little bit higher. You know, a lot of times we hear about the assessments being too high, but seldom do we hear about cases where individuals are trying to sell their property and they'll say, well, you know, you should have assessed it higher. And so those are cases that actually happen, right?
Absolutely. It happens from time to time, not very often though.
Okay. Well, you know, let's talk about the A word, and I mean appeals. What is the time frame for filing, and what are the ways? I know that our constituents have to have supporting documents. Just kind of give us, I would say, a quick rundown if someone needs to appeal, what their rights are, but what are the processes and what do they need to make sure they have?
Well, the taxpayer has 45 days from the date on the notice of assessment in order to file an appeal. And they can do it in three convenient ways. They can do it online, that's what we prefer. They can do it by mail, USPS, or they can bring it into our offices. We have 6 convenient offices. We have 2 in the north, 2 in the south, and we have 2 downtown that would allow people to come in person and file those appeals. So when we talk about the documentation, people bring in many different things, but I will focus one on those comparable properties. Look into your neighborhood, see what properties are comparable to yours that may have sold, and you want to first do your own analysis and see if this appeal is even valid, right? And we encourage folks to we encourage folks to reach out to that appraiser that's identified on that notice, share the documents that you may have, in an attempt to try to resolve the appeal in an informal manner. But there's 3 traditional ways of filing an appeal. Is to the Board of Equalization, which is the common route, but arbitration, it may have some fees, but then you also have the hearing officer.
I'm so glad that you have educated us on that. Many times constituents will call in and we will explain the appeal process to them, and they're like, oh, it's not going to make a difference. And then I've actually had constituents call back and say, thank you. They did side with the information I gave them, what you just said. Thank you for that, because the appeals process is there for a reason. And I know for a fact that it works, because guess what? I had to appeal. And so it worked in my case and a couple of my neighbors' case. And so it's very important that people know the appeal process. Let's say in an off chance that a homeowner is dissatisfied with the outcome, what, if any, are any other remedies they may have?
Well, after the appeals process and it's certified to the Board of Equalization and they render a value and a taxpayer is still dissatisfied with their valuation, they have another remedy to file to Superior Court. If they provide the Board of Assessors with their intent to file to Superior Court, we have yet another opportunity to sit down and share documents and information with the taxpayer in hopes of a resolution by way of a settlement conference. And if we do not come to a meeting of the minds at that point, and then it's officially certified to Superior Court.
Well, Mr. Conley, it sounds to me that the role of your department is not adversarial. You're always trying to make sure you all err on the side of fairness. And even in the appeals process, the last effort is a settlement conference, which thank you, because I didn't even know that that exists. So I appreciate you. We know that laws are ever so always changing. And so I would ask today that you would come back and let our audience know when there are any laws or any things that our constituents need to know. I appreciate you being here with me today. And once again, your department is one that we want to work together with the tax appraisal. We don't want to be adversarial. I know you're going to come back and let us know any updates that we may have. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There's more to come on Mighty Six Conversations. Coming up, we'll discuss exemptions and deductions that you as a homeowner should be aware of to help relieve your property tax burdens. Stay with us. Welcome back to Mighty Six Conversations. Whether you are a long-time homeowner or a first-time buyer, there may be exemptions available that can reduce your property taxes. Joining the conversation to shed more light on this is Mr. James Whitman. Now, I want to make sure I get your title right. You are Deputy Chief Appraiser for Fulton County and Deputy Chief of the Homestead Division, Field Book, and GIS Division. Wow, that's quite a title for one check. Are we giving you 5 or 6 checks?
Thank you, ma'am.
Just kidding.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Let's begin with explaining what homestead exemption is for our audience.
Okay. A homestead exemption is basically a provision of state and local legislation that affords taxpayers, particularly those that own residential property, a reduction in the taxable value of their property so that ultimately they receive a savings when it comes to their property tax bill.
Okay, thank you. Homestead exemptions, do we have to do it yearly, or once you do it, is it one time and done? How does that work?
Yeah, you do not have to file for the exemption on a yearly basis. Once you file for the homestead exemption, as long as you continue to reside in that property, you'll continue to receive that exemption year after year. Now, there are other exemptions that we can discuss that once people reach certain age requirements or maybe income issues, where they can qualify for an additional exemption over the basic exemption, and in those cases they would need to reapply at that point.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Whitmore. What is the difference between the exemption and deductions? Because I've had some people to call into the office and we try to explain. Sometimes they'll think about a deduction and they'll say exemption.
Right.
So can you kind of give us the layman's term of the difference?
Sure. Deductions are typically associated with income tax, whether it's your state or your federal income tax, and the result of that is a reduction in the your taxable income. When you're talking about a homestead exemption, you're reducing the taxable value of the property itself so that your property tax bill is reduced. So one applies to income taxes, the other applies to your ad valorem property taxes that you pay yearly to the county or the jurisdiction in which you live.
Now, when you're talking about homestead exemptions, is there one type, several type?
There are several types.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah, there's a basic homestead exemption. Anyone that owns and occupies their property as of January the 1st of any given year, they would qualify for a basic exemption. Then, as we touched on just a moment ago, there are certain exemptions when you reach certain ages, age 62, 65, and 70. The vast majority of those have income limitations or income thresholds associated with them, other than the age 65 homestead exemption, which is basically it's called a basic senior exemption.
Okay.
But you're getting an additional benefit by virtue of the fact that you're 65 years old. In addition to that, we have exemptions for those that have a full medical disability or a veteran's disability, also the surviving spouse of a veteran who had disabilities, as well as the surviving spouse of a peace officer or a firefighter that were killed in the line of duty. And then one additional, at least, that we have is the low income exemption, which provides a substantial savings when the household income is under a certain level.
Wow, I never knew that. Thank you for coming here and letting not only the audience, but me as a sitting elected official, I need to know all these things. What documentation is usually needed and is it provided at the time of the exemption being filed for?
Now, you can file online using our online portal at fultonassessor.org, or you can actually visit one of our 6 locations throughout the county and file. Typically, what's necessary in terms of documentation for every homestead exemption, regardless of what kind it is first and foremost a valid Georgia driver's license. If you don't have a valid Georgia driver's license, then a valid Georgia ID.
Okay.
We can also accept utility bills from the previous year and a Fulton County voter registration card if for some reason an ID is not available. Beyond that, vehicle registrations for the property owner, their spouse, all of the owners, because those documents typically identify an individual's place of residence. So we can identify the fact that they are indeed in Fulton County. And so for a basic homestead exemption, that's typically all that's needed. Now, if a property is in the name of a trust, for example, we have a trust document that you can get off of our website that is submitted at that same time, as well as the trust documents, because again, we're looking for who owns it and do they reside in that property. Beyond that, when you get into some of these senior exemptions or these income-based exemptions, your state and federal tax returns are required so we can identify your income. And for those that don't file for income taxes, they can supply their Social Security letter so that we can identify their income for that year. Beyond that, when you talk about veterans exemptions, for example, there's documents that the Department of Veterans Affairs provides to show the level of combat injury and the compensation they're receiving as a part of that. And then for those that are not veterans that have a full medical disability, the law requires documentation and affidavit from physicians saying the individual is 100% disabled or 100% unemployable, and that's the documentation that's needed. And so each one of these exemptions is very legislative specific.
I got you.
And so I always encourage people either to visit our website, again at fultonassessor.org, or contact our Homestead office if they have any questions about anything that they need at the time of filing.
Now, the homestead exemption, the basic homestead, is only available on one property. Say if you own several properties in Fulton County.
Yeah, that's correct.
Are there restrictions with that?
You can only have a homestead exemption on one property at a time. You know, if they have multiple properties, the question is, what is your primary residence? Because we have run into situations before where maybe somebody did file on 2 different properties, was initially granted that because we didn't understand or recognize that it's the same person in ownership on these 2 properties. Once that's discovered, we simply give the taxpayer an opportunity to identify the primary residence, and we keep it on that one, remove it for the other. Another issue that often comes up in this line of questioning has to do with the fact that married couples, according to Georgia law, are viewed as one entity. So if something happens and a separation takes place, only one, if one owns one home, one owns another, only one exemption can be applied. If the divorce becomes finalized and there's a divorce decree that's issued and both individuals own their own home, then they could both individually qualify for an exemption, but that's a question we get quite often.
Wow, thank you. I know coming in, this is my 4th year in office, but my first year coming in, I remember getting a call and the person said, well, I had homestead exemption, but they moved to another one of their properties, but they didn't let your office know.
Right.
And so they had to be educated that the homestead exemption is with the particular property.
That's
it's
correct.
Not with the person.
That is exactly right.
And so that was one of the things that I was so glad that I was able to educate. Now, if perchance you all deny the exemption, is there any recourse or any appeal to it?
Yes, it works very similar to valuation appeals. In other words, if a homestead exemption is denied, we send a letter to the taxpayer informing them that the exemption has been denied. Generally, there's some information specifying why it was denied, and then also informing them that they have 45 days to file an appeal. What we typically see happen in these situations, particularly as it relates to our online filing, is somebody will file an application but not provide the documentation that we need.
Oh, okay.
So because of time restraints, if they don't provide that documentation in a timely fashion, we end up denying the exemption. They get 45 days to appeal. And more oftentimes than not, they'll provide the documentation along with that appeal that we needed initially, and we can go ahead and process it for the current year.
So what I believe in dealing with the homestead, I believe that, and I'm going to ask, even make a charge for not only my office, but all of my colleagues. A lot of the frustration, I think, comes from them not understanding how the process works or making an assumption. Case in point, I've had a constituent that called in and said, you know, I had homestead exemption on there and they removed it. Well, you all didn't remove it. What happened was that the person who applied for the homestead exemption passed away. And the person automatically assumed.
Right.
So can you kind of explain to our audience what happens when the person, you know, a spouse dies and maybe another relative inherits the property, or maybe the spouse is still in the property, but the property is deeded in the person. So can you kind of give us a rundown of what usually happens in that case, or more importantly, what they need to do?
Yes, absolutely. It is a question that we get quite often as well. Fundamentally, if a property is in the name of a deceased person, then it cannot qualify for an homestead exemption because they don't actually occupy the property.
Exactly.
What the law does, however, it does make provision that whenever that person passes away, if that estate goes into the name of an executor or an administrator or a trustee, and one or more of the heirs resides in that property, they can file for an exemption in that situation. Two key dates when it comes to homestead exemption, and really much of what we do in the tax assessor's office, is January the 1st, because that's the taxable date in the state of Georgia for all 159 counties. April 1 is the deadline to file for your exemption for that current year. So say an individual was alive and well on January 1, they're going to receive that exemption if they owned and occupied the property. If they subsequently obviously are deceased, even though they're retaining it, it will be retained for that current year. The new ownership has to sign up for the following year. So we run into situations where maybe a husband and a wife were on the deed. One of them passed away. The other one simply needs to file for an exemption. And one of the advantages of them doing that is, depending on their age and depending upon their income level, now that that other spouse has died, they may actually qualify for a better exemption at that point than what they had, you know, prior to their loved one passing away. So, you know, again, whenever these situations arise, always encourage people to contact us. I know it's difficult to go through that kind of thing, but we can direct their steps to ensure that they maintain a homestead exemption that they qualify for year after year.
Mr. Whitman, let me just ask you this one quick question. And it's probably going to lead into what I'm going to ask next. If we have a new homeowner that moves into Fulton County, applies for the homestead exemption, will they automatically receive something saying it was approved? They will?
Yeah, we notify taxpayers that their homestead exemption has been approved.
Okay.
Additionally, whenever the notice of assessment goes out each year during the summer, there will be an indication on that notice of assessment that yes, homestead exemption is applied, or no, homestead exemption is not applied. And again, they have the 45 days to appeal if for some reason they've applied and it's not showing up on their notice of assessment.
And so let me ask you this. This is the follow-up. Let's say for whatever conversation that I don't know that I've been approved, am I able to reach out online or your office and find out that information?
Yes, absolutely. Now, for those that file online, typically they receive their feedback from us in terms of the approval process through the Smart File application. Otherwise, we would actually be mailing somebody a document that says, that it's approved, or giving them the opportunity, if it's denied, again, to appeal that. But yeah, if they have any questions whatsoever, reach out to our office. We're at 404-612-6440, and just follow the prompts directing you to the Homestead Division. Our staff will be glad to give them an update on where their application is in the process.
Well, Mr. Whitman, thank you for being here today. You have brought a wealth of information. Considering you're wearing all those hats, you're doing a great job with it.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we're going to make sure we follow up with you all to get more information out to the constituents. Thank you for coming today. That ends this edition of Mighty Six Conversations. I'm Vice Chair Khadijah, guardian of your trust and one who appreciates the opportunity to serve in making sure that Fulton County government is working to meet your needs and concerns. Want to get in touch with our office? Connect with us online. Email me at khadijah.abdur-rahman@fultoncountyga.gov, or visit us at commissionerkhadijah.com. Like us on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. And of course, you can always contact me at 404-612-8222. Until next time, stay safe and know that Vice Chair Khadijah and the Mighty Six team are working for you.